You are trapped in a room with no doors. No matter how hard you try, you can't escape. Sounds scary, right? But what if the door was never locked? Jeeday felt trapped in a habit he hated. He masturbated every single day. He tried everything to break free, but nothing worked. Until one day, an old village elder gave him a task so strange, so risky, that if he failed, the consequences would change his life forever. But here's the twist. Was the danger even real? Or was it all a trick? What happened next will leave you shocked. Jeeday's hands were trembling. He sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the walls of his small, lonely apartment. His heart pounded, not out of fear, but from the same sickening guilt that had tormented him for years. He was trapped in a habit he despised. It started like a harmless escape, a way to silence the loneliness, the stress, the frustration. But now it felt like he was locked inside a room with no doors. Every time he tried to break free, he found himself back in the same dark cycle. He had read books, watched motivational videos, even prayed. Nothing worked. Jeeday buried his face in his hands. Was this how he was meant to live? But then he remembered something. An old friend once told him about an old wise man who lived in a distant village. They called him Baba Tunde, a man known for giving strange advice that always worked in the end. Desperate, Jeeday packed a small bag and set off on a journey to find him. What he didn't know was that this journey would change his life forever. Jeeday arrived at the village after a long, tiring journey. He asked around until he found Baba Tunde's house, a small hut at the edge of a quiet forest. The old man was sitting outside carving a piece of wood with a small knife. He barely looked up when Jeeday greeted him. "Why have you come?" Baba Tunde asked without turning. Jeeday hesitated, then sighed. "Baba, I have a problem. We all do." "No, Baba. This one is different. I have a habit, a bad one. I masturbate every single day. I've tried to stop, but nothing works. It's ruining my life." Baba Tunde finally looked up, his eyes deep and knowing. "And this habit," he said slowly, "it gives you pleasure, doesn't it?" Jeeday swallowed hard. "Yes, but only for a moment. Afterward, I feel empty, ashamed. It's like I lose a piece of myself every time." The old man nodded as if he had heard this 1,000 times before. He put down the knife and motioned for Jeeday to sit. "Let me tell you a story," Baba Tunde said. "There was a man who traveled from place to place. He had been walking for many days, and his legs felt heavy like stones. The hot sun burned his skin, and sweat dripped from his forehead. His throat was as dry as the desert sand, and worst of all, his food was almost gone. His stomach growled so loudly it sounded like a wild animal trapped inside him. Then, as he struggled to take another step, his tired eyes spotted something far away. At first, it looked like a shadow, maybe a trick played by the heat. But as he got closer, he saw it clearly. It was an old, lonely house standing in the middle of nowhere. His heart leaped with hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was food inside. Excitement filled his tired body, and he forced himself to move faster. His weak legs carried him to the house, and when he reached it, he grabbed the door handle with shaky hands. The door creaked loudly as he pushed it open, as if it hadn't been opened for years. Dust floated in the air, making him cough. Inside, the house was quiet and empty. Broken furniture lay around, and spider webs stretched across the ceiling. The air smelled old, like forgotten memories. Then, he saw it. A table stood in the middle of the room, covered in dust, and on that table sat a single loaf of bread. His eyes widened, his mouth watered instantly. His empty stomach screamed for it. Without thinking, he rushed forward, grabbed the bread with both hands, and tore off a big piece with his teeth. But the moment he bit down, he froze. Something was wrong. The bread was dry, hard. It crumbled in his mouth like sand. It had no taste, no warmth, no softness. It wasn't fresh. It wasn't delicious. It was old and stale, as if it had been sitting there for years. He forced himself to chew and swallow, but the rough texture scraped his throat. His stomach wasn't empty anymore, but he didn't feel happy. He didn't feel satisfied. The hunger was still there, deep inside him. As he looked at the half-eaten loaf in his hands, a thought came to his mind. What if I had waited a little longer? What if I had kept walking just a bit more? Maybe I would have found a village, a warm meal, something better than this dry, tasteless bread. But I was too impatient. I grabbed the first thing I saw, and now I'm stuck with this. Jeeday frowned. Baba, I don't understand. What does this story have to do with me? Babatund smiled. Ah, young man, you will understand in time, but first I have a task for you. Jeeday leaned forward. Babatundi stared at Jeeday for a long moment before speaking. Jeeday, he said slowly, what I am about to ask you to do, you must do it. You have no choice. If you fail, there will be consequences. Jeeday's heart pounded. Consequences? The old man nodded. Yes, if you do not complete this task, something very strange will happen to you. Jeeday swallowed hard. What will happen? Babatundi sighed. I will not tell you, but know this. Many who failed this task before you never remained the same. A chill ran down Jeeday's spine. He didn't know whether to be scared or curious. Now listen carefully, Babatunde continued. For the next 7 days, every time you feel the urge to return to your habit, you must do something else instead. But not just anything. You must find something that challenges you, something that takes effort, something that feels difficult but meaningful. And remember, if you fail to do this, the consequence will come. Jeeday's throat felt dry. But what if I can't resist the urge? What if I slip? Babatunde leaned in close, his voice barely above a whisper. Then you will see, he said. Jeeday left the village with a strange feeling in his chest. Was Babatunde serious? What kind of consequence was he talking about? That night, when the familiar urge crept in, he panicked. Would something bad happen if he gave in? He wasn't sure, but he didn't want to find out. So he forced himself to do something else. He went outside, took a long walk, and started a conversation with an old neighbor he had never spoken to before. The next day, when the urge returned, he did push-ups until he was too tired to think. On the third day, he felt bored and restless. Normally, he would have returned to his habit without thinking, but fear gripped him. What if Babatunde was right? So he picked up a book instead. By the 5th day, something strange happened. He realized he was no longer doing the task out of fear of the consequence. He was doing it because he felt better. For the first time in years, his mind felt clearer, stronger. By the 7th day, the fear had faded completely, and that was when he understood. And the truth, the mind's illusion. Jeeday returned to the village, ready to face Babatunde. I did the task, he said. The old man smiled. Good, and tell me, what was the consequence? Jeeday hesitated. Nothing happened. Babatunde nodded. Exactly. The consequence was never real. Jeeday's eyes widened. What? The old man chuckled. Jeeday, the human mind is strange. It does not always listen to reason, but it listens to fear. Sometimes, we need to trick it into doing what is best for us. Jeeday felt a wave of realization wash over him. So, you lied to me? Babatunde shook his head. I gave you a choice. You could have ignored the task, but fear made you obey. And in doing so, you broke free. Jeeday sat down, his heart racing. He thought about the story Babatunde had told him before, the story of the hungry traveler. The traveler had eaten stale bread because he believed he had no other option. But if he had waited, he would have found a real meal. Jeeday had been the same. He had believed he had no control, that he was trapped. But the moment he thought there was a consequence, he proved that he could resist. The power had always been his. Final lesson: the key was always in his hands. Jeeday looked up at Babatunde, his voice filled with gratitude. You tricked me into proving I was stronger than my addiction. The old man nodded. Yes, because sometimes the only way to escape a prison is to realize the door was never locked. Jeeday smiled. He had been afraid of losing something, but now he realized he had gained everything, and just like that, he was free.